The sound of heavy rain hitting stone. For 21 years, they called me a mistake. They whispered in the dark corners of the great hall that my birth was the reason the moon bled and the crops withered into black husks. The night Gunnar Rasmus dragged me to the jagged edge of the Deadlands, I saw more than just hatred in his eyes, I saw a sickening sense of relief. He truly believed that by discarding a 19-year-old girl, he was cutting a cancer out of his legacy. I thought I would die in the ash. I expected the cold to claim my lungs before the first sunrise. But I didn't know that the darkness they feared wasn't living inside me, it was waiting for me to leave so it could finally claim them. Now, the kingdom is screaming. The great Alpha, the man who once stood like a god above me, is crawling through the mud at my feet. He is weeping for a mercy he never showed me, reaching for a hand he once broke. Because the truth is finally out. I was never the curse. I was the only thing keeping the nightmare from waking up. And now? The nightmare is wide awake, and it's starving. The rain didn't just fall that night, it felt like the sky was trying to wash the Crescent Moon Kingdom off the map. It was a cold, punishing deluge that turned the great square into a pit of slick mud and despair. I stood in the center of the stone amphitheater, my hands raw and bleeding beneath rusted iron shackles that bit into my wrists with every shiver. I was a shadow of a girl, my ribs visible through a thin linen tunic that clung to me like a shroud. Below me, the pack gathered in a terrifying circle. These were people I had served for a lifetime, people whose children I had watched, whose wounds I had tended. But tonight, their eyes were filled with a terrifying, righteous hunger. They didn't see a girl. They saw a scapegoat for their failing lives. Giselle Fischer. The voice hit me like a physical blow, vibrating in the very marrow of my bones. Gunnar Rasmus stepped out of the torchlit shadows. He was a mountain of a man, draped in heavy furs of white wolf skin, his alpha aura so suffocating that the air felt like liquid lead. He looked at me with a disgust so pure it felt like a cold blade pressed against my throat. The seers have looked into the depths of the moon and seen the truth, Gunnar roared, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. Our silver is tarnishing. Our warriors fail to shift. The forest withers while the blight spreads. You are the parasite draining the life from our soil. You are the rot that must be purged. Please, I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of the rain. I've lived in your cellars, Gunnar. I've cleaned the blood from your floors and eaten your scraps. I have nothing but love for this pack. How can I be your enemy? Gunnar stepped into my personal space, his scent of pine and old blood swallowing me whole. He didn't speak. Instead, he backhanded me with enough force to send me spinning into the sharp gravel. My lips split instantly, and the iron taste of blood filled my mouth, mixing with the grit of the dirt. Silence, curse, he growled, leaning down so his breath hot against my ear. You are a stain I should have erased years ago. He looked up at the bloodthirsty crowd. By the laws of the first moon, we do not kill the blight, we exile it. We give it back to the wasteland that spawned it. If she ever crosses back over the silver line, she dies by the blade. The crowd erupted in a frenzied roar. Stones, sharp, jagged flints, began to rain down on me. Gunnar watched with his arms crossed, a cold statue of justice, as his guards dragged me by my hair toward the boundary. They threw me over the border like unwanted trash. The iron gates groaned shut with a finality that shattered my soul. That was the first time I realized something was wrong, and it wouldn't be the last. This isn't just a story, It's a truth that unfolds piece by piece, and the final moment changes everything. Stay with me. If you're new, welcome to Bound to the Alpha. Make sure your notifications are on so you don't miss what comes next. And if this story speaks to you, like it, share it, and join the pack by subscribing. The Deadlands were supposed to be a death sentence. Within the first hour, the sulfurous mist began to coat the back of my throat, burning my lungs with every shallow breath. The trees here weren't alive, they were black, calcified skeletons reaching out with hooked branches to tear at my skin. But as the days turned into weeks, the expected end never came. I spent my nights huddled in frozen caves, shivering so violently I thought my teeth would shatter. I was starving, my stomach cramping into a tight knot of agony. But every time my heart slowed to a crawl, every time I felt the darkness of death leaning in to kiss me, a warmth would bloom in the center of my chest. It was a golden heat, ancient and rhythmic. At first, I thought it was the fever of a dying mind. But then, I began to see the changes. I was walking through a canyon of obsidian dust when a pack of shadow stalkers, beasts of pure malice with eyes like dying stars, cornered me. I had no weapon. I had no strength. I raised my hands to shield my face, closing my eyes and waiting for the teeth to tear into my throat. But the strike never came. Instead, I heard a sound I never expected from a monster, a whimper. I opened my eyes and looked down. My veins didn't just pulse, they were glowing. A molten, gold light mapped out across my skin like a celestial cage, radiating a heat so intense it turned the falling snow into steam before it could touch me. The monsters weren't looking at a victim. They were looking at a sun. They tucked their tails and backed into the fog, terrified of the light bleeding out of my pores. I realized then that the silence of the Deadlands wasn't an absence of life, it was a sign of respect for the power waking up inside me. While I was becoming something more than human in the wastes, the kingdom of the crescent moon was falling into a slow, agonizing decay. For the first few months after my exile, the pack held feasts. They convinced themselves that the air was lighter and the water sweeter. But it was an illusion born of hope. Soon, the prosperity turned into a funeral that would last 20 years. It started with the shifters. The transition from human to wolf is a sacred thing, but suddenly, the magic broke. Young men and women would howl in the moonlight, their bones snapping and grinding, but the fur never came. They remained trapped in a half-human state, twisted, agonizing husks of flesh with elongated limbs and blinded eyes. They became the broken, kept in cages beneath the city, losing their minds to a primal rage they could never release. Then came the sickness. It wasn't a cough or a fever, it was a darkening of the spirit. Purple veins, like necrotic bruises, began to crawl up the necks of the elders. Their eyes turned milky, and they began to whisper in tongues no one understood, speaking of a great hunger that meat couldn't satisfy. Fear became the air they breathed. Gunnar Rasmus watched his kingdom wither from his high balcony. He called for the seers who had condemned me, demanding they fix the blight. But he found them in the temple, their hands dripping with their own blood. They had torn out their own eyes, screaming that the shield was gone and that the darkness of the world had finally noticed the crescent moon. And if you think this is where the story turns, you're not ready for what happens next. By the 20th year, the kingdom was no longer a place of honor, it was a graveyard of the living. With the forest rotting into black sludge and the livestock dying in the fields, the survivors finally snapped. The social fabric of the pack unraveled. Paranoia became the only law, and the Alpha's justice became a reign of terror. Everyone looked at their neighbor's neck, searching for the purple stain of the rot. The survivors began to turn on the weak with a cruelty that surpassed the monsters of the woods. Orphans were driven into the freezing streets to starve. The injured were executed to save resources. And for the first time, they weren't afraid of the curse anymore. They were afraid of each other. I remember the vibrations of the earth telling me of a specific night, a night where Gunnar's second in command, a man named Kale, executed a whole family in the square. Not because they were sick, but because they had an extra loaf of bread hidden under the floorboards. They are hoarding the life of the pack. Kale had screamed to the starving crowd. Gunnar watched the blood hit the stones and felt a cold, hollow realization. He had thrown me away to save them, but without me, his people had become demons. He sat on his throne, his white furs now gray with ash, looking at the purple veins crawling up his own muscular arm. The alpha was dying, and he knew exactly whose face he would see when he closed his eyes. I didn't answer Gunnar's pleas. I didn't need to. I simply walked past him toward the kingdom. Every step I took sent a shockwave of gold through the gray earth, turning ash into vibrant grass and dead dirt into blooming wildflowers. When we reached the gates of the crescent moon, the sight was apocalyptic. The earth had fractured, glowing with a demonic red light from the fissures. The purple mist was so thick it had blotted out the moon entirely. I walked into the center of the great square, the very place where I had been shackled 21 years ago. The survivors crawled out from the shadows, looking at me with a mix of primal terror and pathetic hope. I raised my hands, calling upon every ounce of the light I had stored in my marrow. I prepared to purge the land, to give them back the world they had lost. But the curse fought back. It didn't want to leave. The purple mist didn't just dissipate, it coalesced into a shrieking, shadowy mass of teeth and claws. It was the accumulated hatred and fear of 20 years, and it lunged at me with a roar that shook the buildings. It had been feeding on their blood for too long to give up its meal. I felt the cold, oily darkness clawing at my throat, trying to snuff out the sun inside me. My knees buckled under the weight of the shadow. The golden veins in my arms flickered, turning dim. No! Gunnar screamed. He did something I never expected. He threw his dying body in front of me, striking at the shadows with a silver sword that shattered on impact. He was tossed aside like a rag doll, but that split second of distraction was all I needed. I saw his sacrifice, the desperate act of a man who finally understood his failure, and it sparked a final, incandescent rage in my heart. I didn't save them because I loved them. I saved them because I was the only one who could. I let out a scream that cracked the sky, and a dome of pure, blinding radiance exploded from my chest, incinerating the darkness until there was nothing left but peace. The explosion didn't just clear the mist, it rewrote the physics of the valley. The purple veins vanished from the survivors' necks instantly. The twisted shifters beneath the city felt their bones snap back into place, their first human breaths in decades coming in ragged, sobbing gasps. The red cracks in the earth sealed shut, replaced by rich, dark soil. The kingdom was clean. But it was also silent. I stood in the center of the square, my breath coming in heavy, jagged heaves. The golden light in my skin was dim now, receding back into the depths of my soul. Gunnar stood up, wiping blood from his mouth. He looked at his hands, now strong and clean once more. He looked at his people, who were weeping and falling to their knees. He picked up his silver crown from the mud, wiped it on his sleeve, and stepped toward me. He didn't stand tall this time, he bowed until his forehead touched my boots. The throne is yours, Giselle. You are our queen. You are the only life we have left. I looked at the crown. It was a cold, heavy thing. I looked at the faces of the people who had once thrown stones at me. I saw the guilt. I saw the shame. And I knew that if I stayed, I would always be the girl who was once the rot. I didn't save you so I could rule you, I said, my voice cold and steady, echoing through the silent square. I walked to the silver gates, the same gates that had been my prison and my exile. I looked back at Gunnar, who was still holding the crown like a beggar hoping for a scrap of gold. If you were Giselle, would you have saved them? Or let them fall? The question hung in the air, a psychological weight that none of them could carry. I walked through the gates and back into the wild. The pack watched me go, and for the first time in 21 years, they didn't howl in celebration. They stood in a silence so heavy it felt like a brand new kind of curse. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had given them their lives back, but I had taken their peace of mind forever. Every time they breathe the clean air, they will remember the girl they tried to kill. They didn't cast out a curse, they cast out the only thing that kept the darkness from choosing them. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this journey. This story is a testament to the fact that the things we discard, the people we label as lesser, are often the very anchors that keep our world from drifting into the abyss. I truly appreciate your support. If this story moved you, please let me know in the comments. It's viewers like you who allow these cinematic experiences to come to life.